Thank you. If you have other questions directed towards John, or even as Sarah goes through the presentation, please put them in the chat or in that Q&A, and we'll be happy to address them at the end of the session. But for now, we're going to transition over, and I'd like to welcome Sara Bauder to talk about corn silage, corn silage harvest and management thoughts and considerations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sara.
Thanks, Connie. So I'm just gonna kind of go over the basics of harvest management, but also some interesting data and some work that we're doing here in South Dakota. And the basics sounds a little on the blah side, but sometimes I think we overlook basics, especially with forages. And there's just a few updated things too that are going on in the land of corn silage that I think everyone here might be interested in. So hopefully I can keep your attention. Feel free to put things in the Q&A as we go, and I can answer them and try to watch that as we're moving through the presentation.
How was it?
John, you're unmuted.
I was rambling quite a bit.
John, you're unmuted. So first thing is, why do you produce corn silage? I've got a poll coming up here. I'm just curious why you as a grower produce corn silage, or if you are not a grower and you're a advisor, just give me an idea of why you think your growers are producing silage. Just want to know who my audience is. Excuse me, audience is today. So I got quite a few beef, it looks like. I'll give it another couple seconds here. My best way of being interactive with you is the poll, so that's what we're trying. So it looks like, I think we can end it. We've got a few answers. Looks like the majority of people who are tuned in here are beef producers. Good to know. So there's a little bit of info here for dairy quality, but a lot of this is geared towards anyone with corn silage production. So I have a drought slide in here because these last couple of years have been a bit of a challenge. There is a few things to consider if you are in drought. Now, hopefully this year we won't have such an issue with a lot of moisture across the state this winter, but there's a lot of catch up to do from the drought issues we've had. So hard telling. I just like to put this in here as a caveat. Just remember that nitrates can be an issue in corn silage, even though ensilation and fermentation process can reduce that to some degree. It does not get rid of nitrates. Okay, there's some reduction, but it can still be an issue. So you can test for nitrates at several labs across the state and the region. I put a link there for anyone that is interested, and maybe Connie could put that in the chat for you. If you're interested in our list of feed and water testing labs, we do keep kind of a compilation on our website. The feed value of stressed corn can range from about 60 to 90% of normal silage. So obviously you don't know until you have it tested, but just keep in mind that if it's drought stressed, even if it still has ears, it can still have poorer feed value. So worth testing. Consider your cutting height adjustments. I remember in 2012, I worked for Ron Gelderman in the Soil Fertility Project on campus at that time. And at the time we were cutting all of our corn trials for soil fertility for silage, simply because there was no ears on most of them and we couldn't do valuable research with them. And I remember chopping foot by foot, and we have a lot of data from that year showing that it does really matter. 1 to 2 feet up from the stalk can have a lot less nitrate in the stalk than that bottom 1 to 2 feet. So you might have to make some adjustments based on your tests. You can reduce the presence of nitrates in feed after about 30 to 60 days, but it's not a real widely accepted amount of how much. So it's still worth testing. Drought stress plants are often wetter than you think. I don't have the slide today, but Warren Rushi put together a few of these slides, and he had a good picture of some corn that really looks like it's drier than dry, and turned out it had like 20% more moisture than most of the people we polled on the slide. So you'd be surprised how much moisture that stalk can hold, even if the leaves are dried up. So just remember that proper harvest management and storage is key. So just another question here for you. How do you store your corn silage? Just to give me an idea, again, as I go through this presentation, of how you actually store it. Do you pile it? Do you cover your pile? Do you have an upright, an ag bag, a bunker? I have a couple upright silo guys. Okay. Or ladies. We have an upright as well. I'll give it just a couple more seconds here. Sometimes it's slow to load for some people. But it looks like the majority of you are on a covered pile. And then I have a couple ag bag and a couple upright silo. Okay, I think you can end that. Thank you, Kira or Lindsay, whoever's running those. So here's some information. If you haven't seen this table, it's just kind of fun to look at. So this is using kernel milk as a trigger for determining whole plant moisture. So if you are using a bag, which a few of you were, we kind of recommend that 60 to 70%. So you're going to be at 80% milk. And I will show you a milk line chart here in a minute. And then if you're in an upright, it depends on if you have a harvester or an oxygen limiting, or if you're using a stave silo or a poured concrete silo, that's going to be drier. And basically, we can put things in the upright drier than we can put things in the bunker or the pile, because we have really good storage management in an upright. In a bag as well, you know, things are sealed up in that bag. So we can get away with things being a little bit drier, which gives you a longer harvest window in some cases as well. But we do have to watch with those uprights, especially in a concrete stave silo. The reason that's only 5% difference there is because we can get too dry pretty quick, and you don't want it too wet when you're sealed so tight in a structure. So here is just kind of, I think it's an interesting thing to look at. This is just showing you whole plant moisture by kernel milk. So essentially, you can see there is actually 806 806 sites were tested for this. So this is some really good data. Not typically do we have this much information for one, data point. So we're looking at whole plant moisture against kernel milk. And the take home message here is that, of course, as whole plant moisture drops, so does kernel milk. You can see that those dots are each a site. So there's some pretty wide ranges there in the middle of the chart, which tells us that kernel milk isn't always the most ideal indicator. It's the easiest, and it's what we use in a lot of cases. It's the quickest, but look at the ranges there, ranging from whole plant moisture of like 73 to maybe 54 at 50% kernel milk. So that's a big range. Really depends on maturity. Depends on your soil type and the weather and what line you planted. So how do you determine when to cut silage on your operation? There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious how you determine when you cut silage. There's no shame in clicking the first one. I think a lot of people do that, but I'm going to give you some ideas of other ways we can determine when we should cut. Thanks to the few of you that are playing along with my polls. So looks like, as people are filling it out, quite a few are using milk line. Appearance of the corn plant, I have a few on that. Time of year, just a couple. And then plant moisture test, I have one person. So thanks for the poll. I think we can end that. And I'll share it just so you guys can see that. Kind of interesting to see what everyone's doing. But the vast majority of you are using milk line and then we have plant moisture test. And those two options are going to be the most reliable. But as you saw in my last slide, plant milk line can really be variable. And that's why I wanted to show that data. That's actually from Wisconsin, if you were interested. So here we have a chart. If you are going to use milk line, like I mentioned, it's pretty variable, but here's a chart of what it actually should look like. We don't typically show the interpretation of what milk line should be and just assume. And I think a lot of times it's maybe misconstrued a bit. So 62%, that's approximate across, piles, would be an ideal moisture. If we're talking about the chart we saw earlier, that can vary by structure. So that's about 3/4 milk. You don't want to confuse it with percent milk. So the 3/4 milk line is not the same as 75% milk, right? And I think people mix those two up. But 3/4 milk line, you can see there on the bottom right is showing you what that looks like. Half milk line, we're 50-50. And then at 1/4 milk, you can see up in the top right. So the plants, they might dry about 0.5 to 1% moisture per day in the fall. So dry down happens pretty darn quick. If you haven't done a lot of silage, you might not have experienced that, but I know we've seen it where we go out and test and it's too wet. And then 5 days later, you go out and test and you wish you tested 3 days sooner. So you just have to be careful. You are gaining starch by about half to a point per day. So if you are willing, a moisture test is probably the most accurate way to determine silage cutting timing. And that moisture is important because moisture determines storability, and storability determines the feed quality in the end. And I know most of you said you were beef producers, but although we can use poorer quality feeds with beef cattle, it's still important, and you're putting up all this effort to put the feed up, so why not put it up the best you can, is my theory anyway. So measuring moisture, there's a couple things you can do. Go out, cut a couple stalks down with an old corn knife if you got one, or sometimes people just run the cutter out if they have it ready. So you want to take a sample either from various areas, or if you're running the cutter, try to take a bit of a length if you can get into the field. That's obviously going to be more accurate than the edges of the field. So that's why most people will take a hand sample. You want to cut that up and then do the microwave method. So if you have a wood chipper, that's what we'll do a lot of times at the research farm, but not everyone has one. You might just have to kind of chop it up. So there is information on our website about how to do the microwave method. Basically, you put it in a microwave with a cup of water separate, so you don't burn up your microwave. You don't want to do it in your house. Your family will not be happy with the smells that are produced in your microwave that stay in it for a long time. But if you use a shop microwave, you can do that. And we have instructions on, you just do it in intervals until you get the same weight several times. So you need a scale and a microwave for that. Otherwise, a Koster tester is really nice. It's designed for this. It can dry it down in less than a half an hour real quick, and you're just weighing it as you go. I have the example there of the calculation of how to determine dry matter. I do have a Koster tester, and we're looking at getting a grant to have some around the state, so they're available to silage growers. Usually your local, if your elevator deals in forages at all, or your local feed sales or feed sales rep are going to have access to a Koster tester, and I really recommend them. It's not just for dairy guys. Everybody can use one, and they're quick, they're easy, they're very accurate. So a few other factors to think about that I think get kind of passed over a lot of times are length of cut. So shorter is going to be better packing and increased surface area, of course, just because you have a smaller particle size. Longer is going to be increased. Some of that NDF is going to be increased, but it may increase bunk sorting if you have longer cut length, just because they have the ability to kind of move that around with their nose a bit. If you talk to folks in the dairy world, there's a lot of reasons that some of them like that longer cut. On the beef end, I'm going to say most people probably go with a bit of a shorter cut length for packing purposes. So it's 6 and 1/2 dozen the other, but if you're more concerned about getting it packed, shorter chop length is probably better, especially if for some reason it's a little drier than it should be. Kernel processing is another thing to think about. If I was in a room with you, I would ask how many of you use a kernel processor or have access to one, because not a lot of folks do unless you have a self-propelled or you've added one or have a newer machine. So increased kernel damage means increased digestion, and that's what a kernel processor does for us. Check several loads per hour. So what we suggest, if you're in a larger operation and you have lots of loads coming in, there's a processing cup that Pioneer is actually, I'm not endorsing, it's just that Corteva and Pioneer have done a lot of the modern work on corn silage research and tools. So you'll find that they just have a lot of good resources. They have this cup, I have it in the picture there, my little guy Otto, that's an old picture of him. He's bigger than that now, but we have an extra one that he thinks is fun to play with. But anyway, you want to use that cup. If you don't have one, talk to a Pioneer rep. They should have access to one. They're really handy. Basically, you are supposed to fill the cup every few loads and check for kernels that are not processed. And it has a guide there on it. It just kind of gives you an idea of how well your kernel processing is going. And that can really add up when it comes to feed quality and digestibility. Other option is fecal sampling, but I'd say the kernel processing cup is a lot easier and doesn't cost you anything. So storage, looking at storage options, So when we're filling our pile, our bag, our bunker, our silo, whatever, that's an aerobic situation, right? There's air in the environment. After you go ahead and pack and cover that or seal it up, you're hoping for anaerobic, and we really want to keep the air out of there. That's where it's really important to cover our pile to get proper fermentation, because even if the top crusts off, if you will, there's plenty of air getting in there. So it's really important to have an anaerobic environment to make proper fermentation happen. And then at feed out, of course, you're opening a face in a lot of situations, or even if you have an upright, you're taking the plastic off and you're feeding out. So you have an aerobic situation then, and you're going to have some losses just on the feeding face. So in siling, basically, we're trying to stabilize the feed through a lactic acid bacteria action. That's why we need that anaerobic situation. And it can result in some issues at feed out. So we want to watch for yeast, for molds, for soil contaminants. Those are all issues. And that's why a lot of people are moving towards putting their piles either in a very scraped off, cleanest mud-free area that you can find, or on a cement pad. You'll see the large dairies are pretty much all putting them on cement pads. Bags kind of eliminate that soil contaminant issue. And of course, silos, we don't have a soil contaminant issue in bunkers or in uprights, but you still need to watch for yeast and molds. They can cause major issues. You see funky colors, you see funny smells, you know what silage should smell like most likely. But if you're smelling something off, it's definitely worth the cost of the feed test versus the animals that you're feeding it to. So packing and sealing, obviously, I think most of you know that eliminating porosity is key, and we want to have a good pack. If I don't have time today, but if you ever have an opportunity, there are some great presentations online. Laleman Feeds has a gal named, her last name is escaping me, but Becky is her first name. She does an excellent presentation on packing. So the time spent packing is so important. And in a lot of cases, you just look past it because the loads are coming too fast. So you really want those packing layers to be 6 inches or less to get proper packing happening. And so sometimes that means slowing down the process to get the good pack. And if we're slowing down the process in an effort to have better feed, I guess you have to weigh what's more important in your situation, because a lot of folks don't want to slow down, but you also have the opportunity to pack that like it should be if you're going at the slower speed. So packing density should exceed 15 pounds of dry matter per cubic foot. But when you're packing, what does that even mean? So we call it the rule of 800. Basically, tons of silage per hour times 800 pounds is the pounds needed for packing. So if I have 100 tons as fed, meaning coming straight out of the field, per hour being delivered to my silage pile, bag, bunker, whatever, we want to take that times 800, and that's going to be 800,000 pounds of pack. Now, I shouldn't have said bag. Obviously, that's a different situation. But if you have a pile, 80,000 pounds of pack is not one tractor. Let's put it that way. This doesn't count your push tractor. So it just depends on how many tons are coming in per hour. You want to take that times 800, and that gives you an idea of how much weight should be on that pile. Overpacking is really hard to do, but the top layer is a bit of an exception. What we're finding, the more I work with silage, is a lot of people just make the pile real quick. They pack as they go, but then at the top, they think, oh, I should have packed more. And they just drive and drive and drive and drive over the top. That doesn't really get us very far. They have done some work on that and found that it really just packs that first 6 inches. And then you're just killing it basically by packing it over and over and over again. And since it's on the top, it's got more affinity to have loss anyway. So you're really not gaining a whole lot by driving over the top 100 times. You're better off to drive over the layers as they come in more than just driving over the top of the pile. So, and then covering with an oxygen barrier or plastic as soon as possible is really important in any of the bunker, upright, or pile situations. Every hour counts after that silage is put up. So the quicker you can put it on, the better. Of course, in an upright, we've got silo gases to watch for. And if you are running an upright, chances are you're aware of those issues. But I will have some safety info at the end of this. Do be aware of that. Here's a packing and chop length study. Since I was talking about them, I just wanted to show this. We did this last year, I believe it was, or the year before. Things run together. But we did it in clear tubes just to show from each picture from left to right is a light to heavy pack. So as you move from the left to the right in the sets of 3, it's light pack to heavy pack. And then chop length goes quarter, half to 3/4 if you look left to right. I think it's kind of hard to see in the pictures, but you can see the packing differences if you look closely, and you might be able to see the difference in chop length as well. This study, we were really hoping for clear results and we just didn't get a lot of significant differences. And I'm thinking it's because we use silos rather than piles. It's very hard to put up small piles and pack them properly, especially for a packing study. So we're going to have to look into other ways of doing this. We just wanted to show folks what it looked like, and we're hoping for some data, but I don't have a lot of clear differences from this study that we would expect. So we will hopefully try this again. One kind of interesting note, if you look on the first picture, the third tube from the left, that orange there is actually silo gas. If you're curious, we can't really see silo gas in the air, but if it's in the silage, sometimes in a situation like this, you can actually see it. So that's just an interesting sidebar if you've ever noticed that. That'd probably be more so at the base of a huge pile or in a silo. So cover, sounds like most of you are covering, but I looked up some Kansas State University research. It was actually in hay and forage grower, and they have an interesting good numbers on uncovered piles or bunkers. So about 75% if dry matter is lost, sorry, there's a little typo there, in the top 10 inches. So you have a possibility of 75% dry matter losses in the top 10 inches. And if you take 10 inches across the size of your entire pile, that's a lot of feed, most likely, depending on the pile. There's about 37% feed digestibility that is up in the air there, not knowing what's going to happen. So a covered pile or bunker, comparatively, we've got about 10% dry matter losses, and across the pile, about 72% feed digestibility. So if you look at the differences here, we could lose 75% in our top 10 inches, or if we cover, there's about 10% dry matter loss across the entire pile. And then feed digestibility, of course, is higher on average with a covered pile or bunker because we've got better feed storage. So I just wanted to show that there is data behind that. You can lose quite a bit in that top few inches if we're not covering. And right now we're actually doing a covering study. It's going on at the Southeast Research Farm. We just uncovered our mini silos. We use silos again. You can see one in that top left picture. Sorry, that's taken through a skid loader window, so it's a little dirty, but we hand packed those silos using a skid loader and a plunger to make sure we're getting the proper packing density on each tube. So this year we did the tubes as a cover study. We did uncovered, we did a liquid cover with soluble distillers. And you can see an example of kind of what that looks like in the second picture. We did a demonstration down in Nebraska for a forage field day of the same treatments. And then we did one with oxygen limiting and plastic and one with just plastic. So we'll see what happens. That third picture is what that soluble distillers looked like when we took it out of the tube. Kind of interesting. Had a lot of cracks, didn't appear to seal up real well. The data is currently being analyzed literally this week. So we'll see what results we have. The last picture there on the bottom right is an example of the top foot of an uncovered mini silo. They're about 8 inches in diameter versus the, just took a handful out of a covered one. So there's clearly some spoilage there. This is a slide of Warren's, some silage, shrink, and spoilage. There's a lot of spoilage happening there. This is why covering our pile and keeping weight on that cover is so important, because you really have a lot of losses. And if you think about it, 10 inches of feed is a lot of feed. So avoiding spoilage, I kind of went over this. Proper harvest moisture, make sure you're compacting it as much as possible, getting good pack on your pile, having good feed out methods. We didn't talk about the face of the pile, but that can be important too. Using inoculants, that's a whole nother talk, but inoculants can really help us out, and they're not typically extremely high dollar items. And then quality pile coverings, just looking into oxygen barriers and or just good plastic. So I'm running out of time, but just to put some dollars and cents to it, this is estimating the cost of dry matter shrink per ton using corn as a comparative energy source. So I looked up this morning, old crop corn in our neighborhood was at about 7, new crop was at maybe 5 something. So if you look at the in between, let's say $6 corn, and if we are not covering our pile and we're losing overall, let's say 17, let's go right in the middle, 17.5%, that's $13 that we're losing per ton because of that spoilage. So just kind of an interesting chart to see that you really are losing some money there and feed quality. If you do want to price corn silage, we do have a calculator. That link is there. And if someone has a chance, I can throw that in the chat at the end. If you're interested, that's on our website. It's kind of based on a reference feed, and there are several of these calculators out there that you can look for. If you have some uncertainty, your corn doesn't have ears, etc., use your known factors from a feed test, and then we can usually calculate values of TDN and get some dollars and cents on that feed to help you determine what to do, especially in a drought situation. So be safe with silage. Silage can be super dangerous. A lot of people don't realize that silage pile avalanches kill people every year in the US. Keith Bolson, I had the privilege of knowing him, and he's passed away, but he started a silage safety foundation with his wife, Ruthie, and there is just tons of great information on their website. They started this foundation, I believe I'm not sure when it was started, but they work really hard with large dairies, especially because there's a lot of pile avalanches every year, and people just don't think about it and approach the pile. Of course, silo gas is another issue that they cover as well. So last thing I always mention when I talk about silage is it's a great opportunity to put in some cover crops or put in a relay crop so that you're keeping your soils covered. And these are just some resources. I'm actually here in Sioux Falls at the Soil Health Coalition annual meeting right now. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention your soils following a silage crop. Here's some resources I use for this talk. And just a couple things I want to mention coming up here. Our Northern Plains Forage Association is a startup, and we are having our first membership meeting tomorrow in Sioux Falls. If you're going to be at the farm show, join us at 2:30 in the arena lobby, and we'll have a speaker and we'll tell you what the association's all about. So that's for any forage grower. If you're a buyer or an industry partner, please feel free to join us or contact me if you have questions or want to join. And then on the right is a rye production and utilization workshop. Since I'm the forage person, I thought I better mention this too. This workshop is going to focus more on grain, but we do have some forage information in it. And it's happening on February 15th in Brandon and February 16th in Wagner. You can potentially, we are working on it. Hopefully we'll be able to stream the February 16th meeting online. But that's in progress at the moment. We'd love to have you there in person. Those are free. We just want a registration for a number. So thank you so much. This is my contact information. You can contact me anytime if you have questions. And I want to thank Warren as well. Some of this data was his. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Connie.